let's back up. We started with a financial crisis a few years ago. Does anybody at this table feel there's still a financial crisis? And if so, how are you responding to your work today?
Well, I think that you mentioned in your questions to us that there were some positive economic signs, and I sort of wanted to ask, which ones are you talking about? And then I also wanted to say, well, check back with us in 2.5 weeks or so. And we might be able to speak more cogently to this. But I would say that that the immediate sense of crisis has receded somewhat. I think in the immediate aftermath of the crash, what happened certainly with Mellon and other funders, I'm sure, was that people came back and said, our endowments that you have so kindly funded are underwater. Can you provide spendable support in the interim so we can get them back up? And our trustees were fairly willing most of the time to entertain that argument. Several of those underwater endowments turned out to be back above water very quickly. That's one little indication that indeed that moment of crisis has receded.
The real change that I've seen just in the last, say, 2 years has been government support within Asia for projects for which they're interested in, and also individual support, so philanthropy, the beginnings of philanthropy across the Asia-Pacific region. So if I looked at our program in the last year, we had a major initiative with China, which was a partnership with the Shanghai Art Museum, where they supported about half of the costs of that exhibition with in-kind, in-country support. And the same actually happened with India. 2 projects within a year, and that would never have happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, between 1992 and today, our endowment has grown from about 500 million to about 2.5 billion. And the spin-off of that pays for about half of our operating costs. We had to trim our sails pretty abruptly back at the beginning of during the recession, but there is no question that the many generous individuals who've helped build up our endowment sustain the long-term health of the institution. But we've all benefited from a rising stock market. In the current, sort of the doldrums that we're clearly in for the next few years, it's putting pressure on all of our other revenue streams.
Well, you know, I think there's a sort of trinity for art museums of capital needs and the associated issues, core operating support for salaries, which is our biggest number. And then there's this thing called art, I think most of us try to hang on to in the context of our mission. So if you were suddenly handed $25 million, which pot of those 3, if that's a fair question, would you rush to put it in?
I'd buy art.
That was the right answer.
That's all, you know, it's easier to raise money for a building than operating costs or acquisition funds. And that remains our core. You know, in contrast to the European, so many of our European peers that are safeguarding a heritage that came to them from government collections or royal collections or aristocratic collections. The vast majority of American museums were established as educational institutions. Most of us started with nothing, and the Met had nothing when it was founded. And it's through investment in building up collections that we've arrived at the point we're at today.
But the 21st century we will witness a museum building boom in Asia, with the Chinese government making a statement not so long ago about the intention to build 1,000 new museums in the next decade. And that's just government museums, that there are many plans afoot for private museums.
So in terms of a kind of global perspective, I think Europe is one area that is undergoing, as we read daily, tremendous change. There's incredible concern about financial future, about the state of the euro, and so on. And so I think that's something that we are aware of and is affecting how we think about funding in the future of whether it's the museum in Bilbao, whether it's the operations in Venice. I think it had some impact on a proposal we were working on in Helsinki, Finland last year, and that led to certain insecurity about really the future and how the public sector would be able to support these cultural initiatives.
Well, Speaking of insecurity, Jim, we've watched the presidential debates. We've all heard that both candidates are perfectly content to think about raking away charitable giving. What's your sense about how important that is in the future versus, say, the 1940s and 30s?
So you're actually asking a political
Yes.
question here. I mean, my sense, and I'd be interested in your sense as well, is I don't think it's really at risk instantly. So that's not really in the scheme of things what I worry about the most. I mean, because I think it is so inherently embedded in what we do. If you think about the largest funder in the arts, I mean, the largest institutional funder, it's not us, it's the NEA, and it's pittance to the need. So
we are increasingly seeing expectation of metrics. It's not just people want to put a name on a gallery. There is a real interest in seeing their money being put to work. So we are very much involved in following through. Our development office is very much involved in following through and giving reports about the impact of that gift, very often for many years beyond the point of gift.
Is that true for you too, the Guggenheim?
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation, and I think it's it's often a dance. Donors come with certain ideas, their reasons why they are interested in making a donation. There are areas of the museum's operation or future that they want to support, and they have their own perspective naturally. And many times that's in line with the museums, and sometimes it's somewhat divergent. And I think that's all of our jobs, is to ensure that ultimately the mission is being served.
Having a strong board is crucial, just to prevent any one major donor exerting an undue influence. I mean, we see around the country a number of institutions where individuals with a preponderant giving capability are able to perhaps push an institution in ways that are not necessarily in the interests of some of the smaller institutions. It's the huge cost and investment for us all at the moment, digitizing all of the information that has been analog until 5 years ago. And so that's the tail, especially the larger institutions are trailing the enormous effort of just catching up with the world going digital. But clearly in the future, it's also an enormous potential for us that our online merchandise, online sales are rising, not exponentially, but at a very healthy rate each year. And our ability to solicit charitable donations clearly is, it's a whole new way for us to reach out, a more nimble way for us, if we can manage it, a more nimble way for us to reach out to different sectors. So there's huge potential, but I think we're all just trying to come to grips with it. We're all, it's a new world.
All right.
I think a slightly different aspect to the role that I think digital technology is allowing us to grow is the way in which it's allowing us to reach much larger audiences. And I think that's something that we are always trying to do, and I think it's one of the factors and metrics that many donors bring to the conversation. And so with the things as simple as developing a microsite, Twitter, and so on, we can share what we're doing with many, many, many more people. So I think fundamentally it allows us to make a different case to funders and to develop programs from the very beginning that have a reach that's far beyond the museum and the local community.
Looking at how to keep museums relevant, I'd say that's, along with fundraising, that's been the #1 priority since I became director of the Met. Thinking about who our audience is, thinking about how to make them feel welcome, thinking about how to maintain scholarship, but without it feeling elitist or in a way inaccessible. So balancing, sustaining the two strands of scholarship and accessibility.
I will throw out to you that the Association of Art Museum Directors looks at its members every year. We ask ourselves, how are we doing? And in 2010, we don't have the 2011 and 12 data fully baked yet because we're doing a fancy new maneuver, but to get better information. But we spent $2.1 billion in operating expense in the aggregate of the top 130 or so art museums. And we brought in about $116 million in ticket sales. So you could argue that nationally it's about 4% of operating revenue comes from ticket sales. Now in New York it's different, and in San Francisco it's different, and when there's a big exhibition it's different. But broadly speaking, and if you excused Tom and Ari and Glenn from this calculation, you'd end up with about 2% nationally.
You know, we, back in late 2008, early 2009, one of the many options we considered to close the budget as our endowment fell away, stock market, was should entry be compulsory, and it was dismissed almost as quickly as it was raised. Our board is very committed to maintaining as broad an access as possible to the museum, and it is, as Max said, pay as you wish. The pay as you wish brings in about 15% of our operating budget, so it's a very significant sum of money. But I'm very committed to it being pay as you wish. Generally speaking, taking the broad question, how do we make the museum feel friendlier, more accessible? I think there are all sorts of things we're looking at, from the technology, which of course is now the interface for so many of our visitors, young or old. But there's simple devices, wayfinding, multiple languages. 40% of our audience is international. Putting new effort into recognizing that we can't take information about art history for granted. We have to recognize that most of our visitors, first-time visitors, are not familiar with most of the traditions that we're demonstrating to them. So bringing new creativity to that engagement, it's a complex challenge, and will, I'm sure, continue to engage us for many years to come.